Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual chai chat brought to you by American Center Tashkent. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Gulshan, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Veronica Williams. Hi, Veronica.
Hi.
Thanks so much for taking the time to do a presentation for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So I want to introduce you to everyone. Veronica Williams is an award-winning writer and publishing editor from the US. She has earned a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master's in Professional Writing. Veronica has taught college composition in Arkansas and worked as a textbook publisher in California. But she will soon start an independent publishing company in Texas. A Christian wife and homeschooling mother, she enjoys volunteer writing work and genealogical research. And for her topic today, Veronica has been plant-based dieter for 5 years. And Veronica, today we will hear from you about plant-based diets from the African American perspective, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I want to remind everyone, as usual, today we will have about 30-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session. So please feel free to post your questions in the comment section and we will have Veronica answer them after the presentation. Let's make it as interactive as possible. Veronica, thanks again and over to you.
Thank you so much, Gulshan. I really appreciate just being able to speak to you all today. And I thank you for that lovely introduction and just making me feel welcome. So I hope everyone's ready. So let's get started. Okay, so my topic today is plant-based dieting in America, but with an emphasis in the for African Americans. Now, the emphasis is for two reasons. One, I happen to be African American, so it's a perspective that I best speak to because it's aligned with my own experiences. So I can't really speak for everyone else's thoughts and practices, just my own and some others who maybe some others in my community. And then the other reason is because we'll find this out later in the presentation, but plant-based eating and plant-based dieting is really growing in the US and it's growing fastest among African Americans according to the surveys and statistics and polls. So let's dive right in, shall we? Okay, so my objective today is just to give you guys general information about why people are going plant-based in the United States and exactly how we're doing that. I chose the topic because when we relocated to Tashkent, I quickly found out that plant-based dieting was not as well known or was not practiced as often here. Per my perspective, I haven't actually done research, but per my experience, it wasn't practiced as much here as I had been used to in, say, California in the United States. So I thought it would be a topic that might interest you all, and I hope that I'm right. I guess we'll find out in the comments. Okay, so yes, like I said, I'm only speaking primarily from my experience. I can speak to some reasons that are prevalent within African American communities, but I do not represent all African Americans, and I do not represent all Americans. Like I just, can give you some perspectives. Okay. So moving right along, before we get started, I wanted to just do this caveat where it's not changing your diet to be more plant and less meat and meat products. It's not really a new thing in the history of the world. I mean, many ancient religions worldwide have required or advocated a specialized diet of some sort, and usually the requirement does have something to do with less meat or only certain kinds of meat, or a emphasis on fruit and vegetable and grain. And so it's been a thing that's been around for ages. It's been in Hindu, it's been in Jainism in India, it's been in Judaism, it was in Buddhism and Taoism, and even in early Christianity. There are a lot of Christian sects that do advocate for plant-based diets and have done so throughout history, and we'll find more about that later on. Now, that's a perspective that I can also speak to because I am Christian, and so I know that in certain texts you can find hints or suggestions at plant-based eating as the ideal diet. So, for instance, in the book of Genesis, there is the Garden of Eden. If you look at the account in Daniel, which is ancient Hebrew, and there's an account where he refuses to eat the meats in the diet for the exiled in the land where the Israelites have been exiled, and he almost challenges like their perceptions of food, and he says, well, I'll just eat plants and I will be fine, and he does, and he's fine. And there's Ezekiel has a list of grains that are recommended, so there's even a product out called Ezekiel bread that's made with the grains that are listed in Ezekiel. And then there's Acts, where there's a conversation between the apostles about whether or not new Christians should eat meats that are sacrificed to other gods. It's a whole thing. And so it's been throughout religion, and it's been throughout the culture. So today, though, we have so many labels. I mean, it's not just halal or kosher. I mean, it gets really, people, there's so many specific labels. I didn't list them all, okay? I'll just do some really broad view ones. There are vegetarians who abstain from meat. There's vegan who is strict vegetarian. So it's not just abstinence from meat, it's also abstinence from eggs and dairy and honey. And then underneath those two, you got all kinds of things going on. You got lacto vegetarians, you've got pescatarians. There's just all these really little specific labels that might say, well, I don't eat, meat, eggs, or dairy, but I might still eat fish, or I might not, everyone has all of their things. I prefer plant-based because plant-based just means you eat mostly or only plants, okay? It allows a little flexibility, and it pretty much encompasses all of these other variations with vegetarian or vegan or lacto-vegan or lacto-vegetarian or pescatarian or flexitarian, which is eats mostly plants. I personally just feel like flexitarian is a weird sort of word, so I prefer plant-based. But basically it means the goal in your diet is to eat mostly or only plant-based food items. So fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, that sort of thing. And to stay away from as much as is reasonable and possible meat and meat products, eggs and dairy, okay? So here I have like a chart that kind of just shows those terms that I just talked about. But the interesting thing about this chart is the industry that comes along with this global move in recent years toward vegetarianism or plant-based diets. The industry is in the US, I think it's 13, I think it says 13 billion, and it's projected to grow even more. And then if you notice, there's a statistic right underneath there that says about 70% of the world population is trying to move toward more plants in their diet. So the idea to eat more plants is growing. And there's top regions that have like really large plant eating populations. So India, Israel, Taiwan, Italy, Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, right? So like the US is not really leading the pack in this, right? But it is growing steadily in my home country in the US. So continuing on. So in the US, there's about 3.4% of the population that was counted in, say, 2016 that identified as some form of plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, try to eat mostly plants. So that accounts to about 11.4 million Americans. And that's a huge population. I looked it up and compared it to like populations of other countries, and I chose Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan because they all border Uzbekistan, and I really wanted to put it in, a closeness to home sort of perspective for you guys. The idea of how many people in the United States are actually moving toward plant-based eating and plant-based diets. Now, of that 11.4 million that was measured in 2016, as I said earlier, the fastest growing demographic is African Americans. Okay, so in the US, there's 3% of all United States citizens that have identified as plant-based, and of all African Americans, is closer to 8%. So the number almost triples when you look specifically at African Americans, and that's huge. That's a big deal, especially when you consider traditional African American culinary tradition in the United States. So let's go a little bit of more history here that might put things into a little bit perspective. And in the history is where we're going to narrow it down to the African American perspective. Okay, so we talked about ancient history, and we talked about India and Mediterranean basin, where there were some forms of plant-based eating in ancient history. What most people in the United States, why there's, believe it or not, people in the United States are really surprised that plant-based dieters are largely African American, and that portion is growing. Now, that is not to say that African Americans are the largest group of plant-based dieters in the United States. They're just the fastest growing. Actually, Asian Americans and Latin Americans are actually have a large percentage among them as well. So, in pre-colonial Africa, there were a lot of vegetarian or plant-based diets because the religion was Islam, and there was also some Catholicism over in Ethiopia. And so a lot of those, religions were very vegetarian-based. And then when you get to 18th and 19th century, which is, or I should say 17th, 18th, 19th century, which is the centuries of colonization and all of the movement of the populations around the world, then it comes to America. And in America, you have in the 18th and 19th century, you have some US or UK groups kind of come up with these terms, vegetarian and vegan. And of course, that gets over into the US. For instance, Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the founding fathers of the United States, was a vegetarian much of his life. Like, he started at the age of 16. And then once African slavery ended in the United States, then you have freed African American populations who are practicing vegetarianism. There's some in the early 1900s, not long, right around the time when Upton Sinclair wrote the book The Jungle, which is a very big piece of American history. The book The Jungle is a novel, but it exposes unsanitary practices in meatpacking factories and industries in the United States in around 1905, 1906, and it led to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration. And basically what Upton Sinclair was saying is that the way that meat is processed, it's unsanitary. There's infestations of pests, and there's all these really terrible working conditions and just terrible conditions to be handling food. Well, a little bit after that, you can find an African American newspaper from Baltimore that is for a vegetarian group among Seventh-day Adventists, which is a Christian sect. Okay, and then when you move into the 20th century, so we're in the 20th century now, actually. And so then there's the Civil Rights era, which it's kind of American history 101, the Civil Rights era. Dr. Martin Luther King, who leads a lot of the protests and demonstrations to call for legal and social equality, as well as voting rights for African Americans. Well, his methods for that were nonviolence, and a lot of African Americans actually went into veganism starting at the point of nonviolence, because they extended nonviolence past fellow man into animals. Okay, and then past that you have the Cultural Revolution, which is all about the 60s and 70s and the age of love and anti-war, and again that gets extended toward animal rights. Now, given that history, it gives this concept before recent years of veganism, and even probably now, this concept of veganism or or plant-based eating kind of gets this rap of being just kind of, I guess, over the top protesty. I think actually in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of animal rights activists who were really, really passionate and enthusiastic about animal rights. And so their demonstrations were caught a lot of media attention. And there's an organization called PETA that advocates for animal rights, which is still around. And they've changed their stance, thankfully, to be just slightly less extreme, I suppose, or they at least seem less extreme now. But before probably the last decade or so, whenever you heard the word vegan or vegetarian or animal rights activist, you have like this image of this person just, really making a lot of people uncomfortable, to say the least. But yeah, so in the civil rights areas where I think the vegetarian and vegan and plant-based populations in African Americans began growing. I have a few quotes here that kind of that will kind of demonstrate that a bit. So there is one from Dick Gregory, who is a comedian activist. Dick Gregory explains, unlike under under the leadership of Dr. King, I became totally convinced, connected to nonviolence, and I was convinced that nonviolence meant opposition to killing in every form and in any form. And so he, like I said, he takes the nonviolence thing and extends it into all animals. And then there's others who also think, so there's Dr. Sebi, who was a really important figure among African Americans as far as plant-based diets, who says you don't have to eat less, you just have to eat right. And then there's also Carl Lewis, who was a 10-time Olympic champion, and he also advocated that eating vegan requires commitment to being good to your body and acting responsibly in the world around you. So those are some of the ideologies behind it, and we'll look into those a little bit more. So I have a timeline that kind of brings all of this up to the present. So we have Dick Gregory in the 1960s is when he became vegetarian, and he actually wrote a book. It has such a long title. I always forget the name of this title, but I think it's How to Eat Naturally, or Eating Naturally for Those Who Want to Live, or something to that extent. But it's a really prominent book for the 60s and 70s, and it features recipes and his philosophy as far as why he's chosen to be plant-based. And then when you move, and then also around that time, Black plant-based celebrities were getting highlighted. So Ebony Magazine, which is an African-American publication, highlighted Cicely Tyson, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and Dick Gregory as being plant-based. Now, Cicely Tyson was the biggest actress among African Americans at that time. Earth, Wind, and Fire is this legendary soul band for African American music and culture. And again, Dick Gregory is a really popular comedian and activist. So the movement is growing. That's a lot of other things that happen in between these little points on my timeline. But we'll move into like the 80s. So in the 80s, there's Dr. Sebi, who actually is a Honduran Honduran sort of medicine man who didn't actually have Western degrees in medicine, but he claimed that plant-based diets could cure certain diseases and ailments. And in 1987, he was charged and convicted for charged for practicing medicine, not convicted, but charged for practicing medicine without a license, and he was acquitted. And that, really caught some people's attention. And then also in the 1980s is where you get sort of the beginnings of the rise of plant-based hip hop artists, starting with KRS-One and going on to an act called Dead Prez, one of the most iconic hip hop acts of the 90s. Wu-Tang Clan is like 80% plant-based and vegan now, and that just started, in the 80s. In the 90s, I like to call that primetime plant-based because there were so many television shows at that time that featured African-American vegan characters. So on a sitcom called In the House, rapper LL Cool J was plant-based. On a sitcom called Moesha featuring pop singer Brandy, a good friend of the family, Andell, was plant-based. On a sitcom called Girlfriends, one of the 4 lead characters was plant-based. And on a sitcom called Living Single, one of the 4 lead characters was also vegetarian. And so the move just keeps growing, and we have the publication of more books. So Heal Thyself was a very big plant-based dieting book, as well as Vegan Soul Kitchen by Brian Terry. And then in 2013, it hit like mainstream millennial culture because Beyonce and her husband Jay-Z actually announced a 22-day vegan challenge. Now they're not vegan or plant-based like year-round, but they do advocate for plant-based dieting or plant-based dieting challenges and jumpstart programs to help with physical fitness and rejuvenation. Moving along. So after all of that, in the last decade, there's also been several documentaries that advocate for plant-based eating. And these documentaries are unique, I think, because they came along in the age of streaming. Before the age of streaming, I don't think I ever would have watched, well, that's not true. I like documentaries and films like that, so I would have, but I don't think my husband or many of my friends or family members would have ever watched any of these, but they're right streaming in your TV, so you can just watch them. You're not really making any extra effort. So there's Forks Over Knives in 2011, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. Both of those had sequels in 2014. And then the 2 for me have been Soul Food Junkies and Invisible Vegan, because those 2 spotlight and advocate for African Americans being more plant-based in their diets. And both of those have as their premise that food is a medicine. And because African Americans are disproportionately affected by so many ailments and diseases, it's in our best interest to be plant-based so that we can begin to heal ourselves, like the cookbook from the 1990s that I mentioned earlier. So now we have it. In America, the vegans and the vegetarians are usually under the age of 50. And a lot of them are African American. And there are 3 prominent ones there. So now that we've established that, we can go on to primary concerns, more about why right now, not so much historically, but right now, why African Americans may be interested in plant-based dieting. Some of the primary concerns are health and environmental based. African Americans are disproportionately affected by obesity, high blood pressure, all of these diseases and ailments that are very much diet related. And, it's just an effort for us to not be so sick. And then also environmental concerns, because wherever there is animal-based pollution, so pollution from factory farms and large-scale animal operations, it's usually closest to poor neighborhoods or neighborhoods where African Americans are living, and then also having access to healthy and nutritious food is usually not as healthy nutritional food is not as available in African American communities. So those are some of our concerns about being plant-based, is that we want to be healthy, we want our environment to be healthy, we want safe air to breathe, clean water to drink, and we want better, brighter futures for generations ahead. Now, for a lot of us who are concerned more in social and political change, the act of eating healthier, eating plant-based so that you can be healthier, and advocating for having a better environment in your community, and just going plant-based in these respects is in itself part of a revolution, or part of a resistance, and it's part of a declaration that our lives actually do matter. It's like the most personal way, I think, that we can express that, is to take care of the lives that we actually do possess. So that's the overview. So going forward, we have a few more useful terms. All right. Food desert is just a location where access to healthy food is extremely rare. Food insecurity is when you are limited in your access to food. It means that you are at a level of poverty where sometimes you have to make decisions on whether to get food or to get shelter, or you don't have enough money to get food. And so, you don't really know as confidently as most people would know where your next meal is coming from, or when your next meal is going to come. And then there's health disparity, which means there's a higher health burden among certain people groups. So you'll see, like in the US, there are households that are food insecure, but the number is more in the African American community. And so that kind of feeds into some of our concerns when we decide to go plant-based. Some of us. So diet-related health disparities, I've already sort of mentioned these a little bit. Diabetes, high blood pressure, cancers, obesity. African Americans typically represent larger portions in like most of that. I actually have some statistics here that I can kind of read for you guys. So here, according to CDC's National Diabetes Statistics Report, in 2020, diabetes cases were higher among African Americans and Latinos. And food insecurity has a high correlation with increased diabetes rates. So for example, in 2009, the death rate from diabetes in Chicago, in a neighborhood where that was a food desert that doesn't have access to healthy foods, was twice that of an area that had health food grocery stores. And then, and the same similar statistics exist for high blood pressure and hypertension. More than 40% of African American men and women have high blood pressure, and that is really high by comparison to the rest of the U.S. population. Black males have the highest overall cancer mortality, and more than 1/3 of American adults. And 48% of African American adults are obese. So it's 1/3 for most Americans, 48% for African Americans. So these are all reasons why we might want to go into plant-based dieting, just to pursue better health. And then for environmental pollution, I mentioned that factory farms usually have a lot of pollution, and they're usually situated in close proximity to African American communities, and not just African American communities, but poorer communities or Latino American communities. And so there's lots of movements right now to try to lessen that. One way that you can lessen that is if we are eating as a whole, as a country or as a community, less meat, then there's less need for such mass productions of meat to go on in our area. And then also an environmental concern is food deserts. So African American and Latino neighborhoods have fewer large supermarkets and more small grocery stores. And when we say small grocery stores, we're talking stores that don't offer a lot of fresh produce. I mean, they might have milk, they might have eggs, they may have alcohol, they may have sugar and candy and a lot of box processed things, but not a lot of fresh produce. And the journey or the trip to get to somewhere where you can buy fresh fruit, buy leafy greens, buy whole grains and things like that will be a long trip. I know that in certain areas that I've been in, The nearest store is 20-30 minutes away. That's almost an hour round trip. And so it's plant-based is an effort to help with that. So the main barriers to plant-based nutrition in the US are awareness and access. Okay. And for African Americans, so proposed solutions, we've been doing re-education programs. So cooking classes and cookbooks and recipes and school programs where we're advocating for more healthy plant-based meals in school programs. There's a few school districts who have switched over to serving vegan meals in school districts. There are health organizations that have advocated for plant-based diets, including Kaiser Permanente, which is the largest healthcare organization in the United States. And their dietary guidelines are going toward plant-based diets. And then another thing is budgeting. I have links here if you guys are interested for later, but there are two of my favorite online personalities to follow for plant-based meals and plant-based nutrition are Tabitha Brown and Chef Babette. There's also budgeting that's also a concern because sometimes plant-based products and plant-based shopping is highly expensive. So there's ways to budget. A rapper, Stickman from the group Dead Prez, who is a plant-based advocate, has written 7 ways to eat good on a good budget. And it's basically things like avoid packaged foods, go for the produce, reprioritize about what's important to you. You can decide whether or not, food and health is important to you. One plant-based advocate put it this way: you either pay for it now or you pay for it later, meaning you can plan to pay, for good and decent food, healthy food, plant-based food now, or you can expect to pay for healthcare when, you are dealing with the diseases that come from poor diet. And then also there are community cooperatives. So it's a group of people in a community coming together to do things that are mutually benefit for everyone in a community. So there are a lot of community gardens. And also there is moves for environmental legislation just to make sure that, we do have access to healthy food, but also that we are not impacted by pollution that can harm our health as well. So nutritional re-education, there's lots of things online. I have 2 things here. There's Physicians Council for Responsible Medicine has Good Nutrition site that offers starter kits and resources and fact sheets and recipes, anything that you may need. There's also Chef Charity Morgan who has tips. There's so many vegan personalities and movements and school programs and things that you can join in the United States that will help with that, and just ideas for what can be done in other communities that also want to advocate for plant-based eating. For culture and community, this is one of my favorite stories. This guy here, his name is Ron Finley. And he says, food is the problem and food is the solution. Ron Finley lives in South Central LA, where there were food deserts. And he decided that he had a little piece of land in front of his property that belonged to the city, but that he was responsible for maintaining. We all have them. They're like, I don't know what to call them, but they're like little plots of grass in residential areas. And sometimes you can find them like in the middle of streets, like to separate traffic directions. There's like these little plots of land that just have grass. And so he decided, him and a group of people from his community, that they were going to plant gardens there. And they did. They planted fresh fruit and vegetables, and it was free for anyone who wanted to come in and taught people how to plant gardens. And then he got a citation from the government that said that he is not allowed to do that. And he thought it was odd because before then it was just kind of trash and debris there. And so he fought that citation and eventually got a law passed where now he's legally able to plant gardens there. He started like about 20 community gardens as of yet, and he advocates for plant-based eating. And so there are people in his community now who were not getting the nutrients and plant-based nutrition that they needed, and now they are, thanks to his efforts. So it's one of my favorite stories. And I have the video here. I hope that we can post some of these links later for you guys to check out, because it's a fantastic story. And he's just one of many. There are many community co-ops and community gardens throughout the nation, especially in Black communities, that advocate for plant-based dieting, learning how to garden, re-educating our children and ourselves about proper nutrition and health. And it's just things that are very needed. And then it takes us to some of my last slide, and it took me a while to get here. I was hoping to actually spend more time here, but it's practical tips for how to actually go plant-based. So one of the questions that I get, even among my family and friends, is, you know, what do you mean you don't eat meat? Well, what do you eat instead? How do you get your protein? Like, all of those questions are very, very very easy questions to answer, but they also are questions that tend to scare people away from this. So we do substitute meat, dairy, and eggs. We substitute meat with things like beans and lentils and nuts. We substitute dairy. There's so many dairy products on the market right now that you can substitute. You've got rice milk. There's various nut milks. There's chickpea, like pea milk. They're just like these milk-like products that are made actually with plants. And if you get a good nut or almond one, or a chickpea or pea milk one, then that will replace the protein that you would have had in milk anyway. And then you can substitute eggs in baking. So we use like chia seed or flaxseed, or sometimes tofu in baking recipes, and that pretty much takes the place of egg. Or you can do a tofu scramble, which, you know, covers your eggs in the morning for breakfast. And we also add new produce, try new produce. I have a long list that I'm not proud of produce that I did not like or consume before I went plant-based. I mean, corn, avocados, raspberries, blackberries, just there's so much. There's so much kale, various forms of leafy greens, spinach, arugula. Like, there's just so much stuff that I had not tried and did not know that I enjoyed until I went plant-based. So always adding new things in. And then just being very mindful of our nutrient balance, just making sure that we have enough protein and B12 and D3. Those things you can do if you just take time to plan. Plant-based dieting does take time, and you do have to read labels. And then with some flexibility, because a lot of people think that if you are plant-based, it means you absolutely cannot ever allow any dairy or meat or eggs to, you know, grace your palate. That's not true. You have to be flexible, because your options are not always the same everywhere you go, as we just talked about with food deserts. And we're living in Tashkent, which is a completely different country than, you know, where we first started our plant-based journey. And so we have to learn to adjust and be gracious guests. You know, you just try to limit as much as you can. So I explained to my husband once, I was like, well, if I have to have something that has milk or eggs in it, I try not to have like 3 or 4 different servings on the plate. So if I have to have like a breakfast that has eggs, I also don't want a piece of biscuit or pastry or pancake that also has eggs and milk in it. Plus, I also will have bacon on the side. Like, I can choose like maybe one of those things, and then fruit and vegetable the rest. Okay, so you just try to be as flexible as you can with it. And yeah, so that's it. I have so much information that I tried to squeeze in, and I didn't quite get it all in. But I'm here for questions if you guys have them. So fire away.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It was so interesting. And especially thank you for including plant-based films and movies, so people who are interested can go back to see this presentation and probably find something for themselves. Yeah, we do have actually a lot of questions to you,
Okay.
And comments. Let's start from the beginning. So Amanachelov is saying that he feels much better than he keeps plant-based diet. It's lighter, healthy, makes him feel refreshed, and gives a break from a strong, fat-rich Uzbek cuisine.
Oh, great. Wow. Well, I'm so glad. Great to hear. I feel the same way. I feel like I have more energy. I do feel lighter. I do feel healthier. Things that um, I thought I couldn't do, I can actually do. It's really fantastic when you first switch over. Yeah.
All right, great. Gulnara Bagdalov is saying awesome topic and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your compliment.
So, question from Oman. What types of vegetables do you usually eat? What would you recommend to eat for those in Uzbekistan who want to try a plant-based diet?
Oh my gosh. So, listen, I love Tashkent and I love Uzbekistan, and here's my primary reason. Um, the amount of produce that I can get here is fantastic. Okay, um, so my definitely any fruit you can get your hand on. Bananas, apples, oranges, grapes, kiwi. I mean, just whatever you can find, whatever is available. Good. Same with vegetables. Broccoli, cucumber. Uzbek has this wonderful melon. I don't know what it's called, but it's like white on the inside, and I love it. It's fruit, but I love that melon. Any greens? You guys have these beautiful big bushels of like spinach, lettuce, cabbage. I mean, it's so full and so plentiful. It's one of my favorite things about the city. It's just getting to shop and pick all of the available produce. Oh, and dried beans and grains. Oh my gosh, there's so much. Black beans, kidney beans. I don't know what a lot of the produce here is called, but I have eaten a lot of it. There are these, there's like these beans. They're kind of half and half. They're like white and like red. So they're like half and half beans. They have two different colors. There's so many different kinds of beans that we use for protein. You guys have lots of grains. So you guys have farro, you have buckwheat, you got quinoa. There's rice. There's so much. I could just go on forever. There is so much that we found here, and we're just like, yo, like we can we can create some things here. So it's very much abundant and a lot. But I think some of my favorites though, I really like bok choy and spinach. Those are my favorite leafy greens. I really like there's like I have to ask my husband what it's called, but there's like a peppery sort of cabbage that I found here that I really like in salads. It has a nice crunch. It's like really big and long and was kind of primarily white, but that cabbage is like crunchy and spicy and delicious. And I like lentils. The lentils that we found here, I can't have enough. And eggplant. Yes, eggplant. Eggplant. I discovered a dish that's called eggplant caviar, but it's basically like grilled eggplant and vegetables like all mixed in together, and it's fantastic.
It's great. I love it too. Okay, next question from Aman. Is it more expensive to be on a plant-based diet compared to traditional meat-based diet?
You know, that's a good question. It depends on how you go about it. So, plant-based diets get expensive and easily more expensive than a meat diet if you're going to processed plant-based foods. For instance, there's a lot of meat substitutes on the market. So the big ones in the United States are Beyond and Impossible. Beyond meat substitutes, it's made to look and taste and feel like meat, but it's made with plants. They're very, very expensive. They're like 2 or 3 times the cost that you would pay for meat in the United States. They're pretty expensive. If you're going for substitutes for like cheese, right? So if you want like a plant-based block, if you want a block of like plant-based cheese, okay, that's going to be really expensive. And so if you're going for those types of products, then yeah, it'll be more expensive. But if you go for produce, like just produce, just, I'm going to stock up on greens. I'm going to get some dried beans. I'm going to get, a lot of grains. I'm going to get nuts. Nuts are kind of pricey, but the offset is that the vegetables and the fruit are cheaper, but nuts are one of the pricier items when you go plant-based. But the seeds, the grains, the vegetables, and the fruit usually are much cheaper if you stick there. It's when you go into the prepackaged things, the prepackaged plant-based things, or processed plant-based things, where you get the cost. And then in the United States, sometimes, for reasons that I don't understand, if you are shopping in a regular grocery store versus if you're shopping in a store that has marketed and branded itself as a health food store. So if you say take Whole Foods, which is a popular health grocery store in the United States, versus shopping at more regular grocery store. So a regular grocery store in Texas, where I'm from, would be H-E-B or Kroger. And those grocery stores, like, you might find a different cost for produce, and I can't figure out why. I think it's because some of it is organic, and organic produce is produce that's grown without pesticides or without as many pesticides as, say, your conventional produce, and those do get a little pricey, but there are ways around it. There's a list of produce that's already grown without a lot of pesticides, so that you can focus on buying those as opposed to trying to buy the ones that are labeled organic, and you will still get the same value just without the organic label. So it's a good question. Usually if you stick to, like, we call it stick to the outer aisles of the grocery store, because in America, the grocery stores are set up where, like, the produce is on the far end of one side of the store, and then I think, like, the frozen food section, are like milk and dairy and cheese and all of that is on the other side of the grocery store, and then all of the meat is at the back, and then everything in between is kind of like processed packaged, like cereal, soda, candy, like prepackaged, like meals that are high in sodium or high in sugar. All the rest of it is just kind of packaged stuff. So we say, if you stick to the outer aisle, if you stick to the produce section, where the stuff that's grown and kind of just pulled off a plant and brought to the grocery store, if you stick to that stuff and you're, whole grains, and yes, you can do plant-based on a cheaper diet, but it also does require planning. And so people have to balance, like, the planning and the meal prepping with, keeping the cost down, because the minute you decide, I don't have time to plan, I don't have time to meal prep, and you switch over to the packaged things, then your cost goes up. So the amount of effort that you put into it will keep your costs down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question from Amon. What do you think would be a good substitute for meat? I'm personally allergic to beans and usually find it hard to find a better source of proteins than meat, chicken, beef.
Okay. So allergic to beans. So that will put you in nuts. It would also probably move you toward tofu. Now, tofu is sort of a prepackaged product, but tofu is one of the cheaper ones because tofu has been around for ages. If you remember, I told you guys that a lot of plant-based stuff started in the ancient religions. Well, tofu came over to us from this continent, from Asia. And Benjamin Franklin actually brought it to the United States. Go figure. And so tofu is like where you go, when you can't get to, beans, or where you can't get to nuts. Like the amount of protein in there will help. The other thing I would probably say is leafy greens actually have more protein in them than people realize. Dr. Milton Mills, who's an African-American doctor with PCRM, Physicians Council for Responsible Medicine in the United States. He explained it like this, and he has 2 great videos on YouTube, by the way, if you look him up. He explained it like this. He said, people think that protein comes from animals, but it's actually a byproduct. I'll get back to it, but it's actually a byproduct. And so what happens is that large animals graze on grass. So you have your cows, they're eating grass. Okay. And all of that grass and green and plants that they're eating is what's creating the protein in their bodies that we're also consuming after we eat meat. So there's a lot of protein found in leafy greens and produce. If you look up protein in produce, you get this long list of how many grams of protein is in different forms of produce that you wouldn't even expect. And I just realized, because my husband is so sweet, he sent me a message and pointed out to me that tofu is made from soybeans, which doesn't really answer your question about.
Okay, stay with us, guys. I think Veronica is going to be back soon. Until we get our speaker back, I want to thank everyone for wonderful questions. And bear with us. We'll continue soon. Welcome back, Veronica.
Sorry, I lost connection. Okay. So an alternative to tofu, since it's made of soybeans, is seitan, which is actually made from whole wheat, or tempeh. Tempeh is another one. I think also made from wheat, and those are recipes that you can actually make at home from wheat gluten. I think that will give you lots of protein as well. And then there's
okay.
Yeah, those would be good options too.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. All right, question from M. Irmatov. What do you cook on plant-based diet for dinner? As you know, we Uzbek people eat quite oily dishes for dinner. So we know that you cook eggplant caviar, right?
Uh-huh.
What else can you recommend to cook?
So almost any traditional American or African American dish that we were consuming before, we have what we call veganized, which means we just went and looked at the recipe and substituted, for other things. For instance, chicken pot pie is like a savory meal. It's chicken, it's vegetables, it's in like a sort of casserole, and then it also is in like a crust or biscuit sort of covering. It's bready, it's meaty, it's vegetable-y. You would just substitute the chicken for a bean or a potato or both to help fill it out, and whatever I'm using to make the crust, instead of using butter, then I might use coconut oil or a different oil, and it's the same meal, just no meat. I like lots of pasta and pasta salads because I can put in. There's a pasta salad I make that I got a recipe from my good friend Alexis Joy. You might see her book back here. She wrote a book about losing baby weight, but she also has a recipe of pasta salad that I just love. It's cooked pasta, and cooked beans, like cooked kidney beans or cooked black beans or whatever kind of beans you want, but it has raw vegetables. So you have raw broccoli, raw carrots, or you might have pickled olives. You might add walnuts to that, and then you can add on top of that a dressing, so like a pesto dressing or whatever kind of salad dressing you want. And you can also add some leafy greens, like maybe some spinach in, and mix that all together to make some wonderful like pasta, fresh produce kind of pasta salad. So and you get all of those nutrients from like the raw broccoli and the raw carrots and the you get the protein from the beans. If you really they are some packaged like vegetable pasta things in the US. So there's ways that a company has decided to make pasta with vegetable grains as opposed to whole wheat grains, but whole wheat is fine because there's protein in that. Or you can do like literal vegetable pasta, which is a way of kind of cutting pasta to where it's like long strands of vegetables. So you can actually take like a zucchini or carrots or any vegetable or root vegetables are good, but zucchinis or carrots or any vegetables that you can eat raw and kind of just there's like a processor cutter thing that I have that kind of cuts it long and stringy like vegetables. And so you can have like pasta like that. But basically any meal that we were eating before, I basically just went and looked at the recipe and, veganized it, which is, I was like, okay, meat, let's substitute. Okay, egg, let's substitute. Okay, dairy, let's substitute. And then just made it again and, carried on. So, but there's also lots of online recipes and online cooking videos. I mean, YouTube's kind of exploded with those that will show you different recipes and things that you can do that you didn't think of. Like I saw Tabitha Brown has her deviled egg recipe. Deviled eggs is kind of an American food. It's like boiled eggs that you cut in half and you take the yolk out and you mix the yolk with all kinds of like spices and seasonings and vegetables, and then you pile it back on top of the white part of the boiled egg, and it's like a appetizer sort of dish. She made one where she used pickled mushroom caps as what would be the white part of the egg, and various like sort of fruits and vegetables and spices as what would be the egg yolk piled on top. And it is delicious. It's almost the same dish, just, not the same ingredients. So it's really easy to, hang on to your favorites. You just have to switch them up a little bit.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So question from Amon Nachilov. When I was in the US, I would often notice that fresh food that was just left untouched by the end of the day in our university dining cafe was thrown away, which is a regulation. However, lots of food is just lost while it could be used to feed people for free or minimum price. How do you think would this issue, could it be addressed?
Oh, absolutely. That's another issue. When we talk about food deserts and access to food in poor communities and African American communities, the travesty of it all is that there's so much extra food lying around that goes unused. So yeah, it's definitely an issue that I think should be addressed. And I think one of the ways to address it is like what we talked about, re-education or retraining, and where nutrition and culinary and food knowledge is concerned, because a lot of people, in my opinion, are kind of afraid of food. There's these dates on food. This is like an expiration date, or when you don't know much about food, like you don't know how it's grown, you don't know what it looks like when it's ripe, you don't know what it looks like when it's overripe, you don't know what it looks like if it's not picture perfect fruit, right? Like you've never seen an ugly tomato before in your life, so you don't know what to do with an ugly tomato. You think you can't eat it, it's poisonous or something like that. I don't know. And so there's a lot of food that gets wasted, and I think just re-educating and people about fresh produce and what food is supposed to look like and how to know when food is good and healthy and good for use would do a lot of that. And there are actually some charity organizations and programs in the US that are moving to make deals with grocery stores and make deals with, food programs that have a lot of food waste, where they come and pick up the food that isn't used and take it to a food charity facility or food charity organization to later distribute to poor communities. Because They just don't want the food to go to waste. So yes, it is a very real issue, and I think that part of the reeducation that can be done with nutrition, as far as plant-based nutrition, can also go to help make sure that we're not throwing away and wasting food, because the travesty of hunger and the travesty of food insecurity and food deficits, that there is more than enough food around to feed everyone. So yes, thank you for that question.
Thank you. So we have a question from Hamid Khan Amirulayev. He is saying that it's actually, so an opinion and question. In my opinion, vegetarians can't eat high calories food. In my country, all food is high calories and healthy food.
Mhm.
Loaf and soup. What is your opinion? So I think the idea is that if food has a lot of calories, then it's healthy.
Okay, so in your country, if a food has a lot of calories, that makes it healthy. If I'm
Yes,
understanding right. Okay.
people think it's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can, I mean, high calorie food is not really the issue. It's kind of where those calories are coming from, would be the concern for someone who's eating plant-based for health. So if a lot of those calories are coming from processed sugar, then we don't want to consume there. If a lot of those calories are coming from like fat, like animal fats, then we don't typically want to consume those. But you can have a high calorie meal that's plant based. Absolutely, you can pile on, you know, the meat. I'm not meat. You can pile on the beans. You can pile on the veggies. You can pile on the fruit. You can pile on the grains, as much as you need for your calorie intake in your body type. Like my husband weighs significantly more than me, which means he needs to eat large portions of food and more constant and more consistently and constantly throughout the day. So he does have, pile on the calorie meals, but it's where those calories are coming from. As long as the calories are, not processed sugar or high fat calories, then absolutely, like, eat as much as you need to live and have the energy for your body and your lifestyle. Absolutely.
Thank you. Question from Jeremy Williams. What is your go-to meal?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my husband. Just FYI, full disclosure. I like avocado toast, which has gotten, like, it's kind of like this thing that gets made fun of in the United States because, like I said, a lot of plant-based people in the United States are younger; they're under 50, and so that generation, is millennial generation X or whatever, and putting avocados on toast is just kind of something that I don't know who discovered it or why they discovered it, but it's fantastic. I love avocado toast. I will eat that just about any time it's offered to me. I also really enjoy like the vegetable pasta meal that I talked about. I enjoy smoothies, incredibly a lot of smoothies. One of the documentaries that I mentioned, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, isn't necessarily a vegan diet, like only eat plants in it. Sort of documentary, but it did advocate for what's called a juice cleanse, which is basically where you're eating smoothies or drinking juices that are plant and vegetable based, and that helps kind of reset or refresh or rejuvenate your health system. And so I really love smoothies because I can put just about anything I want in there. Like if I want a bunch of fruit, or I want to eat my veggies, but I don't want to taste veggies, then I put the veggies in the smoothie and then pile in the fruit. And then I will get my leafy greens, but I didn't taste them at all because I didn't want to taste them. I have a sweet tooth. I like baking. I like sweets. I can bake just about any dessert that I want, really, without ever having to use like eggs and dairy. So my daughter and she likes making cookies a lot. She makes oatmeal cookies a lot. I really like cereal. It's whole grains, and I get to use plant-based milk. Real easy, real quick. And I like recipes that my husband makes. My husband can kind of veganize anything, but they're not really go-to meals because they take a while to make. Like he makes a plant-based version of like barbecue, like barbecue meat, but it's plants. So he, comes in and does some magic I don't understand with wheat gluten, and comes out with a big hunk of something that looks like meat, but he's sliced it and there's barbecue sauce on it, and I just love it. We love cauliflower. If you are into like fried foods, we liked fried chicken and French fries and all of that. Well, cauliflower is a good substitute for that. So and this is one of those high calorie things, so we have to do this really sparingly. But if there's a special occasion or a meal, and he's like, "What do you want me to cook?" I'm like, "Can you please make fried cauliflower?" Because I could eat that all day. Fried cauliflower is one of my faves. But cauliflower is just it's just a good vegetable that we really love. It tastes great raw. You can bake it, you can fry it. Whatever you do to cauliflower is fantastic. It always tastes good. So.
Wow. Actually makes me want to become a vegetarian because so many interesting ideas. And also Jeremy has this comment, Napa cabbage. What is it? Could you please
trying to tell
us?
me the name of the cabbage that I like. The cabbage that's like that we found here. That's like kind of crunchy and spicy that we use in our salads a lot. It's called Napa cabbage. That's what he's trying to tell me to answer the other students' questions.
So we have it here in Uzbekistan, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I think we covered all the questions. There is one question from Hamid Khan Amrulaev. He thanks you for this important information and he asks to tell the name. So Hamid Khan, please tell us in the comments the name of what you want to know and we will answer because it's not very clear. Mm-hmm. And one more comment from Lyubov Andreeva, lentil soup.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing too. All right. So unfortunately, time flew and we have to wrap up, but it's been a very interesting conversation. And Veronica, thanks so much for sharing your experience with us. And it's a lot of new ideas. It's a lot of things to think about. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And thank you for those wonderful questions. I will do my best to make sure that I get Gulshan and put on the Facebook page as much as I can any information that you guys asked about. And it's a really good experience. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Veronica. And I will want to remind everyone that please don't forget to join us next Friday as we're going to talk about earthquakes with Jose Guevara. So see you guys next week. And Veronica, thanks so much and have a good weekend.
Oh, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.